Tomorrow marks 3 years since Dodd-Frank, the sweeping financial reform act that was, among other things, supposed to help put an end to too big to fail banks. But 3 years later, those same big banks are even bigger. One person says 30% perhaps. Now, a handful of senators from both parties are looking for an alternative by bringing back regulations from the 1930s that were killed off during the Clinton administration back in 1999. Here's Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts.
The big banks, the big four, are 30% bigger than they were in 2008. And so what this is about is to say, we got to have that wall in place again. Go take your risks, go do what you want to do on the investment side. But the banking side, it needs to stay boring. And those insured deposits need to stay off limits for the risk takers.
But this wall, this firewall she's talking about, will likely be an uphill battle. Deneen Borelli is joining us. She's a Fox News contributor, the director of Outreach for FreedomWorks, and author of Blacklash. Chris Kofinas is also here, former chief of staff to Democratic Senator Joe Manchin from West Virginia. Thanks very much for joining us today on a Saturday. We appreciate it.
Hi, Juliet.
All right, so let's talk about this Glass-Steagall Act. This was actually enacted back in 1933. It was repealed in 1999. What it essentially does is it separates commercial banking from investment banking. So in other words, just the regular checking and that type of stuff, separated from all the hedges and the hedge fund type of activity. This was something that was repealed again back in 1999. There are a lot of folks that say, let's bring it back, including Senator John McCain, of course, a Republican, and Elizabeth Warren, as you saw, a Democrat. It's got bipartisan support. It's been introduced last week. Deneen, what do you think about this?
Well, I think this is a no-go. Elizabeth Warren and John McCain are just wrong. I mean, when you think about it, the 2008 banking crisis was a crisis that was really created because of big government. In 1977, we had the Community Reinvestment Act that mandated banks to provide mortgages to individuals who really could not afford these mortgages. And then you had banks that were really gambling on the mortgages, like Bear Stearns and Lehman, who did go under, but they gambled big time, and that was part of the reason of the mortgage crisis that we experienced.
I want to play you a soundbite. This is an interview a little excerpt of an interview that Peter Barnes from Fox Business Channel did with Elizabeth Warren. It kind of goes into exactly what you were just talking about, Deneen. Let's play that soundbite.
You're already hearing from critics who are saying that had Glass-Steagall been in place in 2008, it would not have prevented the financial crisis, that the companies that failed were Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, Countrywide. The
companies we bailed out were Citibank, Bank of America, Wells Fargo. Those are the ones who got the big TARP money.
Chris, I'll bring you in just one second, but Deneen, since you were talking about that, what's your reaction to what the senator had to say?
Well, look at J.P. Morgan Chase, for example. They didn't even need TARP money, and they were forced to take the money because the government said so. So clearly, getting back to Glass-Steagall, I think Elizabeth Warren and John McCain are just wrong on this.
Chris, what do you think? Is it time to bring it back?
Well, I mean, it's definitely time to make sure that we don't have another financial crisis. I mean, the reality of the situation was you had bad mortgages and bad loans, but you also have a banking system that is incredibly interdependent. And when you have a liquidity crisis like we did during the financial crisis, it doesn't just want to affect one institution, it affects all. And then you add in, I think, this really complex, derivative type of transactions that it's very difficult to manage. You don't necessarily know what the risk is. So when you have a situation as we do now where the banks are even bigger than they were, I think the question is, what can you do to mitigate the risk? Because if you have another financial crisis, here's the cruel reality. I'm not sure the federal government or anybody is going to be big enough to be able to bail them out. So the risk has to be mitigated. The question is, what is the right approach? Glass-Steagall may or may not be. The reality is, politically, it'll be very difficult to pass.
But really, the government should not be bailing out banks. Let the free market decide what banks stand and what banks fall down. Listen, Continental International Bank fell. It went down. And Glass-Steagall was in effect when that bank went under. And that's not even an investment bank. That was a commercial bank. So that was a bank that did not survive under Glass-Steagall.
The interesting thing, I think, for a lot of folks folks is that when they hear this, they think bipartisan. You've got both sides agreeing on something. I mean, when does that ever happen? But it seems like the biggest hurdle is going to be the banking lobbies themselves. I mean, obviously, you have bankers saying basically the current, universal model. They say that's a model that is effective. It works. It gives consumers access. They have everything, all their banking in one place. Now, again, that's what the banking lobbies say. One banker also said the bigger banks equal bigger competition. Your final words on that? Deneen, we'll start with you.
Let the free market decide. If you look at Dodd-Frank, it's only 30% of the rules that have been in place. It's 3 years old now, 14,000 pages of rules. I mean, are you kidding me? 400 rules and 14,000 pages. Think about the resources that have been involved in Dodd-Frank. That's a failure as well.
Chris, this may just be a symbolic. I mean, this is what the conventional wisdom of some folks out there that are watching this all unfold. They say this may just be a symbolic sort of effort to at least sort of encourage or at least start up, be the impetus for debate on more regulation. Your final words on this?
I mean, I think that's probably right. I mean, I think you're going to have an ongoing discussion about this because, contrary to the mythology, if you don't have some type of role where the government is going in and making sure that these institutions are not being careless, you can't just sit there and let the free market decide, because if we had let that happen, the entire economic system would have collapsed.
Now, the free market would decide. I mean, when you go back to the 1977 Reinvestment Act, there was a failure there.
Yeah, no, listen, it's a really romantic notion that somehow the free markets can decide, but if that would have happened, the entire U.S. economy would have collapsed. So that is what I think good people on both the Democrat and Republican side are trying to figure out. Whether this is the right approach, probably still too early to tell.
Chris, on that note, we got to wrap it up. Chris, Deneen, thanks very much for joining us on Saturday.
Julia.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.